Camilla had a plan. It was quiet, carefully built, and almost nobody knew about it. Princess Anne found out, and William shut it down completely. The plan nobody was supposed to find. There are two ways to acquire power inside the British royal family. The first way is loud, visible, ceremonial. Crowns placed on heads in Westminster Abbey while billions watch. Titles announced in official gazettes. Proclamations read aloud from palace balconies to crowds gathered below. The second way is quiet. No cameras, crowds, or announcements. Just a slow and patient accumulation of position, influence, and access, until the power is already held before anyone outside the inner circle has noticed it moving. Camilla has always understood the second way better than almost anyone. That is not an accusation. It is simply an observation supported by the entire arc of her life inside the British monarchy. She waited. For years, for decades. While the world debated her, dismissed her, or despised her, she stayed close to Charles and waited. And eventually, patience delivered her something that many believed she would never have: a crown. But crowns, as it turns out, are not always enough. Because what sources close to the royal family have now confirmed is that by late 2024, Camilla had begun working towards something additional, something that went beyond the title she already held, something that, if successful, would have repositioned her inside the monarchy in a way that nobody outside a very small circle had anticipated or approved. It was a title plan, allegedly constructed carefully, discussed privately, and advanced through the kind of quiet back-channel conversations that leave no official record, and required no public announcement until the moment arrives when the thing is done and cannot be undone. The palace has a long history of exactly this kind of maneuver. Students of royal history will recognize the pattern immediately. Significant shifts in royal power rarely arrive with warning. They arrive already completed, presented as settled facts, leaving those who might have objected with no practical avenue for objection. Camilla allegedly understood that pattern very well, and the plan, according to sources, was designed to exploit it perfectly. Before we go further, it is worth establishing what was already known about Camilla's position inside the monarchy, as it stood going into 2025. Because the context matters enormously for understanding why what she was allegedly pursuing was so significant. Camilla became queen consort on September 8, 2022, the moment Charles ascended to the throne. This happened after the death of Queen Elizabeth II. The title was confirmed formally at the coronation on May 2023. It was a moment that many royal watchers had spent years insisting would never come. The woman who had been cast as the villain in the most painful chapter of the monarchy's modern history was standing in Westminster Abbey wearing a crown. The public reaction was complicated. It always is with Camilla. There are those who have genuinely warmed to her over the years, who credit her with steadying Charles during the most turbulent periods of his life, and point to her charitable work and public commitments as evidence of a woman who has grown into her role with more grace than her critics ever predicted. And there are those who have never forgiven her, who sees every title and ceremony as an affront to Diana's memory. Those who measures every step of Camilla's advancement against the suffering of the woman whose marriage she allegedly helped to destroy. Both of those reactions exist simultaneously inside the British public, and they always will. But inside the palace, the question of Camilla's position is not primarily an emotional one, it is a structural one. And structurally, the question that Camilla was allegedly beginning to ask by late 2024 was this: what happens to her position when Charles is gone? That question is not morbid, it is practical. Charles was 76 years old in 2024.
The king has been diagnosed with cancer. Let me bring you that statement.
He was managing a cancer diagnosis that had been confirmed publicly earlier that year. The succession timeline that had once felt abstract was becoming something more concrete with every passing month. Camilla is reported to have watched that timeline with patient attention, the same attention she has brought to every significant development in her royal life. And what she allegedly saw concerned her. Because the honest answer to the question of what happens to her position when Charles is gone is not a comfortable one. The titles she holds exist in relation to Charles. Queen consort means the wife of the reigning monarch. When the reigning monarch is gone, that specific designation disappears with him. What comes next depends almost entirely on William. And Camilla, according to sources, was not willing to leave that entirely to William's discretion. So a plan allegedly began to take shape, quietly, carefully, through conversations that were never meant to leave the rooms in which they happened. The problem with quiet plans inside the British royal family is that the walls have always had witnesses, and one of those witnesses was Princess Anne. What Anne discovered when she began paying attention to what was happening would set in motion a confrontation that nobody inside the palace saw coming, not even Camilla. Anne discovers what is really happening.
You don't have much of it at all.
Oh, only when I'm in London, I tend to...
Princess Anne has never been easy to deceive. That is not a boast on her behalf. It is simply what decades of watching her operate inside the most scrutinized family on earth confirms. Anne was born into this institution. She was shaped by it from her first breath, and has watched it from the inside through abdications, divorces, scandals, and deaths. She has in every variety of palace intrigue that the 20th and 21st centuries could produce. She knows how it works. More specifically, she knows how people work inside it. She knows the difference between a conversation that is simply a conversation and a conversation that is laying groundwork for something else. Knows what ambition looks like when it is dressed in the language of duty. And she knows what a power move looks like when it is packaged as a reasonable request. Anne has seen all of it, many times over, which is why, when certain conversations began happening inside palace circles in the autumn of 2024, Anne noticed, not immediately, or all at once. But gradually, the way a pattern becomes visible only after enough individual pieces have accumulated to reveal the shape underneath. The first piece arrived on October 2024. A senior courtier, speaking in what was described as an informal setting, raised a question. The question of long-term title structures for members of the royal family in the event of a succession. The conversation was framed as administrative, forward planning, the kind of practical discussion that responsible institutions engage in well ahead of the moment such planning becomes urgently necessary. Nothing alarming on the surface, but Anne was in the room, and Anne registered something in the framing of the question that others present apparently did not. The conversation was not genuinely open-ended. It was oriented. The examples cited, the historical precedents referenced, and the specific scenarios explored, all of them pointed in one direction, toward Camilla's position after Charles. Anne said nothing at that moment. She listened and absorbed, and she filed it away with the precision of a woman who has spent a lifetime understanding that the most important information is rarely the information people announce. The second piece arrived on December 2024, a private document described by sources as a discussion paper rather than a formal proposal. It was circulated among a small number of senior palace officials. Its contents have not been fully disclosed publicly, but individuals who have seen it describe a document that explored the historical and constitutional basis for extending certain honorary titles to queen consorts following the death of a reigning monarch. The document was careful, measured, academic in its language. It cited precedents from European royal houses. It referenced constitutional scholarship. Also, it presented itself as an intellectual exercise rather than a practical recommendation. But the conclusion it was building toward was not difficult to identify. It was building toward a specific title, one that would give Camilla a formal and permanent designation inside the monarchy. It did not depend on Charles's continued reign for its validity. A title that would exist independently, that would carry its own weight, its own protocol, its own place in the order of precedence. A title that would, in practical terms, make her position inside the institution significantly harder for a future king to diminish or remove. When Anne received a copy of this document, she read it twice. Then she made 3 phone calls. The identities of the people she called have not been confirmed by sources, but what those calls contained, according to individuals familiar with the situation, was a series of very direct questions. Anne wanted to know who had commissioned the document. She wanted to know how widely it had been circulated, and she wanted to know whether Charles had seen it, and if so, what his response had been. The answers she received sharpened her concern considerably. Charles had seen the document. His response had been described to those around him as broadly sympathetic. He loved Camilla. That was never in question. The idea of her future security inside the institution was not something he approached with indifference. His instinct, characteristically, was to want to protect her. But Charles's instincts and the institutional consequences of acting on those instincts were two very different things. And the people managing the document's circulation were, according to Anne's sources, very deliberately keeping the institutional consequences out of the conversation with Charles. They were presenting the title question as a matter of personal loyalty to his wife, not as a structural intervention with significant implications for William's future authority over the monarchy. Anne understood immediately why that framing had been chosen. Charles approached questions of loyalty and love differently. He approached it from questions of institutional governance. If the title plan was presented as a loving gesture toward Camilla, his resistance would be minimal. If it was presented as a constitutional power shift with direct implications for his son's reign, the conversation would look very different. The people advancing the plan had chosen the framing deliberately. Anne decided the other framing needed to be heard. She also decided that the person who most needed to hear it was not Charles, it was William. What Anne did next was not dramatic. There was no emergency meeting, no urgent summons, no raised voices in a palace corridor. Anne does not operate that way. She is methodical and precise. And she understands that the most effective interventions are the ones that arrive with evidence rather than emotion. So before she went to William, Anne gathered everything she could find. Every piece of the pattern, conversation, document, and every courtier's carefully framed question. She gathered every historical precedent cited in that discussion paper. She built a complete picture, and then she took it to William. What happened in that meeting is where this story shifts from a palace procedural into something far more significant. Because William's response was not what anyone had predicted, it was faster and harder, and it sent a message that went far beyond the title question itself. That is exactly where we are going next. The title plan explained. William did not just react wrongly. There was a reason, because the title plan, when laid out in full, is not a minor administrative adjustment. It is not a small ceremonial gesture designed to honor a queen consort's years of service, nor is it the kind of thing that gets quietly approved in a routine palace meeting and forgotten about by the following Tuesday. It is a structural intervention, and once you understand the full scope of what was allegedly being pursued, William's response stops looking like an overreaction and starts looking like the only rational answer. Let us start with the basics. In the British monarchy, titles are not simply honorary. They carry weight, real, measurable, institutional weight. They determine protocol and precedence. The titles determine who stands where in a room, who speaks first at a formal gathering, and who receives what level of deference from palace staff, government officials, and foreign dignitaries. Titles also determine something less visible but equally significant. They determine how difficult a person is to remove from the picture. A queen consort's position inside the monarchy is, structurally speaking, dependent on the reigning monarch. When the monarch dies, the queen consort's formal role ends. She becomes a queen dowager, a title that carries respect but relatively limited institutional power. She is no longer the primary female figure of the monarchy. That position transfers to the new monarch's wife. In practical terms, when Charles dies, Catherine becomes the senior queen, Camilla becomes secondary. The deference, protocol, and the institutional weight all shift. The transition is not hostile. It is simply structural, and Camilla, according to sources, was not content to leave that transition entirely to structural inevitability. The plan that was allegedly being constructed would have pursued a specific designated title for Camilla, one that went beyond Queen Dowager, one that created a formally recognized category for her inside the institution that carried its own independent standing. The title allegedly under consideration was Queen Mother. Queen Mother is not simply a descriptive term. Inside the British monarchy, it carries enormous historical and emotional resonance. The last person to hold it was Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, wife of King George VI and mother of Queen Elizabeth II. She held the title from 1952 until her death in 2002. For 50 years, the Queen Mother was one of the most beloved and institutionally significant figures in the entire royal family. The title carries specific protocol implications and financial implications. It carries a place in the order of precedence that is distinct from and in certain ceremonial contexts senior to other members of the extended royal family. It also carries something less quantifiable, but arguably more powerful: public affection, historical weight, the sense of a permanent and irreplaceable place inside the national story of the monarchy. Now consider what it would mean for Camilla to hold that title. It would mean that William, upon becoming king, would not simply inherit a stepmother, whose position depended on his goodwill and his decisions about how much access and influence to extend to her. He would inherit a formally designated queen mother, whose title existed independently of his choices, whose protocol position was constitutionally established, and place inside the institution was anchored in something he could not simply decide to reduce. It would mean that the clean generational transfer of power that William has been preparing for, the sharp distinction between his era and his father's, would be complicated from the very first day of his reign by the institutionally embedded presence of a woman whose history with the family is inseparable from the most painful chapters of his own childhood. Anne understood this immediately, and she made sure William understood it too. But the title itself was only part of what was allegedly being pursued. Because alongside the question of what Camilla would be called was a second, and in some ways more consequential question: where would she live? Camilla currently has access to Buckingham Palace, Clarence House, Sandringham, and Balmoral as part of her role as queen consort. Those properties are not hers. They belong to the crown or to the monarch personally. Her access to them exists because Charles is king. When Charles is gone, that access does not automatically continue. Clarence House would most likely pass to Camilla as a residence. That has been widely reported and is consistent with historical precedent for senior royal widows. Highgrove, the private country home Charles has loved for decades, would likely go to her as well. But Sandringham and Balmoral are different. Those properties pass directly to William as the new monarch. They are personally owned royal estates, not crown property. What happens to Camilla's access to them is entirely at William's discretion. The title plan allegedly included provisions that would have tied certain residential access rights to the Queen Mother designation, formalizing Camilla's continued presence at key royal estates in a way that did not depend on William's ongoing invitation. Think about what that means in practice. It means that William would become king and immediately find that his own ability to manage the royal estates he had inherited was constrained by formal arrangements put in place before he ever wore the crown. That the woman he had already, in other contexts, begun to quietly distance from the centers of power inside the institution. She would have a formally established right to be present at the very properties that represent the heart of royal private life. The plan was elegant in its construction. It worked with the grain of British constitutional tradition rather than against it. It used historical precedent as its justification, and her plan framed everything in the language of honor and continuity, rather than the language of power and positioning. But the effect would have been unmistakable. It would have tied William's hands before he even had a chance to use them. There is one more element of the plan that sources have described, and that may be the most revealing detail of all: the timing. The plan was allegedly designed to be formally proposed and ideally approved while Charles was still alive and still king. The window being targeted, according to sources, was sometime in 2025, before Charles's health deteriorated further, and before William's de facto authority over palace decisions became so established that a formal proposal of this kind would have no realistic path to approval. The plan needed Charles's signature, and it needed to get that signature before William was in a position to prevent it. That is not forward planning. It is not an administrative exercise in constitutional scholarship. It is a race. And Anne, when she finally understood the full picture, made sure the right person knew the clock was running. What William did with that information was swift, decisive, and left absolutely no room for misunderstanding. That is exactly what comes next. William finds out and responds. William does not panic. That is one of the things people who have worked closely with him consistently say in moments of crisis. In moments where lesser individuals would reach for a phone and start making noise, William goes quiet. He thinks and assesses. He identifies exactly what needs to happen, and then he makes it happen with the minimum number of words required. It is a quality that has served him well inside an institution where panic is expensive and noise is dangerous. But quiet does not mean passive. And what sources describe in the days following Anne's intervention is a William who was very, very far from passive. Anne brought the full picture to William in late January 2025. The meeting was private. No aides present beyond those whose presence was absolutely necessary. No record kept beyond what protocol required. The details of what was said in that room have not been fully confirmed by any single source, but the actions that followed tell the story clearly enough. Within 72 hours of that meeting, William had done 3 things. The first thing he did was commission his own independent review of the constitutional and legal basis for the title being proposed. He did not rely on the existing palace legal team for this. He brought in external constitutional advisors, people whose loyalty was to the law rather than to any particular figure inside the institution, people who had no stake in the outcome of their assessment. Their conclusion was delivered within days. The title plan was not constitutionally impossible. That was the uncomfortable finding. There was no absolute legal barrier that would prevent the designation from being pursued and potentially approved. The historical precedents cited in the discussion paper were genuine. The constitutional arguments, while stretched, were not entirely without basis. In other words, if the plan reached Charles at the right moment and framed in the right way, with the right people in the room supporting it, it could work. That finding sharpened everything for William. Because a plan that is constitutionally impossible is easy to dismiss, a plan that is constitutionally possible but institutionally disastrous requires a different and more demanding response. The second thing William did was go to Charles. This is the part of the story that sources describe with the most care and the most delicacy. Because the conversation between William and his father about this situation was not a simple one. It was not a son arriving to confront a parent about a mistake. And it was not a future king delivering an ultimatum to a reigning monarch. It was more complicated than either of those things. 01 to 06. Charles loves Camilla. That fact sits at the center of everything. 40 years of history. A relationship that survived public hatred, palace opposition, and the most sustained period of royal controversy in the modern era. Charles did not reach the point of marrying Camilla by being easily deterred from protecting her. William knew that walking in, so the conversation was not framed as an attack on Camilla. It was not framed as a rejection of her place inside the family. William was careful about that, deliberately and strategically careful. He framed it as a question of institutional integrity. He laid out what the title plan would mean in practice, not for his personal relationship with Camilla, for the monarchy itself, and for the clean transfer of authority that the institution needed, for the public perception of a crown that was already navigating significant pressure from multiple directions simultaneously. He told Charles that approving a title plan of this nature, at this moment, in these circumstances, would not protect Camilla. It would expose her. Because the moment it became public, and these things always became public, the narrative would not be about honoring a queen consort's service. The narrative would be about a power grab, about a plan constructed in the shadows to tie a future king's hands before he could govern freely, and an institution that could not manage its own succession without internal maneuvering that belonged in a different century. William told his father that the story would destroy the very thing it was designed to protect. Charles listened. Those familiar with the meeting describe a long silence after William finished speaking. Charles is not a man who arrives at decisions quickly when they involve the people he loves. He weighs and considers. He feels the weight of competing loyalties in a way that has defined his entire reign. But he had also spent his life understanding the monarchy's survival instincts. He knew what institutional damage looked like. He had lived through enough of it to recognize the pattern William was describing. The meeting ended without a formal decision announced, but the discussion paper that had been circulating among senior palace officials was quietly withdrawn within a week. No announcement or explanation. There was no official acknowledgement that it had ever existed. It simply disappeared from the conversation, the way things disappear inside the palace when someone with sufficient authority decides they should. The third thing William did was the most telling of all. He said nothing publicly, no statement, no briefing to friendly press contacts. There was no carefully placed quote in a sympathetic newspaper column, nothing that could be traced back to him as a source or interpreted as a public move against Camilla. William understood something important about this situation. The most powerful response was not the loudest one. The plan had been stopped. The document had been withdrawn. The constitutional window that had been identified was now closed. Everything that needed to happen had happened. Making noise about it would only create a new problem and force Camilla into a public position. It would require Charles to publicly arbitrate between his wife and his son. It would give the story legs that it did not currently have. William chose silence. But silence inside the palace is never truly silent. The people who needed to understand what had happened understood it completely, Camilla among them. And the atmosphere inside the palace in the weeks that followed that understanding is something that sources describe with a single word: changed. How it changed, what it means for Camilla's future, and what it tells us about the monarchy that William is preparing to lead is exactly where we are going, right now. The fallout and what it means for the crown. The British monarchy runs on appearances. That has always been true. The ceremonies, uniforms, carefully choreographed public appearances, and the measured statements released through official channels. All of it is designed to project one thing above everything else: stability. The impression that everything inside the palace is ordered, considered, under control, that the people responsible for the institution are managing it well, with the kind of steady and unhurried authority that centuries of practice produce. But appearances require maintenance. And in the weeks following William's intervention, maintaining the appearance of stability inside the palace was costing considerably more effort than usual. Sources describe the atmosphere in the early months of 2025 as quietly but unmistakably tense, not explosive. Not the kind of tension that produces raised voices in corridors or dramatic confrontations that leak immediately to the press. The tension that is far harder to manage, the kind that lives in silences, in rooms that empty slightly faster than they should, in conversations that stop just before they reach the point. Camilla knew the plan had been stopped. She knew William had gone to Charles, and the document had been withdrawn. She knew that the carefully constructed window she had been working toward had been closed before anyone outside the innermost circle had even realized it was open, and she knew that Anne had been the one to close it. The relationship between Camilla and Anne has never been described by anyone close to either woman as warm, functional, professionally civil, occasionally cooperative when the demands of royal duty required cooperation, but not warm. What happened in early 2025 did not improve it. Sources close to the situation describe Camilla as deeply frustrated in the weeks following the withdrawal of the discussion paper. Not publicly, never publicly. Camilla has spent too many years inside this institution to allow private frustration to become public visibility. But privately, among the small circle of advisors and confidants she trusts, the frustration was real and it was significant. She had invested considerable time and careful thought into what was being constructed. The framing had been deliberate. The constitutional groundwork had been genuinely researched. The timing had been chosen with precision, and it had been dismantled not through any legal challenge or through any formal institutional process, but through a private conversation between a son and his father. That is the part that stings the most inside palace walls. Not losing, losing quietly. He was losing in a room with no witnesses and record, losing in the way the monarchy has always managed its most uncomfortable moments, privately, deniably, completely. For Camilla, the practical consequences of what happened extend well beyond the title question itself. Because the title was never only about the title, it was about what the title represented: security, independence, a position inside the institution that did not depend entirely on the goodwill of a man who has always been careful about how much goodwill he extends to her. That security did not materialize. And the question of what Camilla's position inside the monarchy looks like, as Charles's health remains a constant concern, is now more open than it has ever been. Royal commentators who have been following the situation closely point to a pattern that has been building for years. William has been making his intentions clear, not through declarations, but through decisions. The removal of Annabel Elliot from the Duchy of Cornwall payroll, the replacement of Charles-era courtiers with William's own trusted circle, the quiet but unmistakable repositioning of where real authority inside the institution actually sits. Each individual decision looks like management. Together, they look like a blueprint, and the title plan's failure fits that blueprint precisely. William is constructing a monarchy that will be entirely his when the moment arrives. No inherited obligations he did not choose. No formally embedded figures whose institutional position constrains his freedom to govern as he sees fit. No arrangements made in the previous reign that survive into his own without his explicit approval. That is a vision, a clear and deliberate one. And nothing that has happened in the last 12 months suggests William is moving away from it. For Anne, the outcome of her intervention represents something she has been working toward. in her own quiet way for considerably longer than this single episode suggests. Anne's concern has never been personal animosity toward Camilla. Those who know her well are consistent on that point. Her concern has always been institutional, the monarchy's integrity, the cleanliness of the succession, and the absence of the kind of embedded complications that have caused the institution damage in the past. She saw a complication forming and removed it. That is Anne in the most essential sense. No drama and public positioning. Just a problem identified, a solution found, and an outcome delivered with the minimum of noise and the maximum of effect. The monarchy that William will inherit is being shaped right now. Not in coronation ceremonies or state banquets or official proclamations, in withdrawn documents, and in quiet conversations, in plans that never reach the finishing line. Camilla is still queen consort. She still walks beside Charles at every public engagement. She still holds every title she was given at the coronation. Nothing has been taken from her officially, but something has shifted. Everyone inside those palace walls knows it, and the woman who made sure it shifted is the same woman who has been watching this institution from the inside longer than almost anyone alive. Princess Anne always knows where the line is, and she will not allow anyone to cross it. Camilla had a plan. Anne saw it coming. William ended it before it ever had a chance. The palace will never confirm any of this, but the decisions being made inside those walls are already telling the story. Drop your thoughts below, share this video, subscribe for more.